Hello, thank you for joining another TeamSense Tuesday webinar today. My name is Caroline, and I'll be behind the scenes of today's webinar, where our speakers will be discussing no call, no shows, and absenteeism you frankly can't see until it's too late. Before we jump in and introduce our speakers, let's cover some housekeeping items. So questions are always encouraged, and we ask that you place them in the Q&A panel instead of the chat. We'll get to your questions really at the end of the discussion, and I'll be here to help manage the Q&A on behalf of Justin and our team today. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Caroline. I'll Adam's our main speaker today, but I'll just introduce myself briefly. I run marketing at TeamSense, and I'm very excited to be here with Adam St Clair, friend, colleague, and enterprise account executive here at TeamSense. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning. Gosh, I'm like forced to have this moment of reckoning again with my profile picture up here. I was talking with Rob about this last week, and it's like, at what point is the delta between your profile picture and your current state like too big, and you just got to get a new picture? Too much hair ago, I think.
You're still the same Adam. We're good to go.
All right, we're good then.
So let's jump in. And we're here to talk about the no call, no show. Adam, you've worked with many of our customers, and you've been on the factory floor yourself in a previous job. What is a no call, no show? For those, I don't know if there's too many people on this call that will have heard that word for the first time, but just in case, what's a
Yeah.
no call, no show?
Yeah, a good level set and pretty simple. When an employee's scheduled to be at work, they don't show up and they don't communicate that to anybody. So scheduled to show up, they're not there.
And so what does that mean for people that are counting on that person to be on the line, for the manager or the colleagues that are waiting for that person?
Yeah, and kind of a good separation there. You know, you mentioned spending some time on a factory floor as part of my career, and so I mean, I have firsthand experience of the impact of a no call, no show as a colleague, as a peer, and in the production environment in particular, it can actually be pretty impactful, like across the board. I know on days when I'm counting on my team members to show up so we can hit productivity delivery goals. If we're not fully staffed, if we don't have a full team, um, I'm probably going to end up staying late because in manufacturing logistics in particular, uh, not getting the pallets on the truck, not delivering against productivity goals for whatever you're making, that's not an option. It's just not an option. And so when you're not fully staffed, the folks that are at work end up kind of pulling the weight for folks that aren't. So often kind of results in, yeah, a longer workday cuts into, family time or personal time or whatever. So it sucks. It's not just a business impact. It's an impact on like morale and engagement, right? Like it's frustrating.
And so I think you're mostly referring to the employees. What about the managers that are getting the line running ready for first shift, or that kind of that scramble moment? What's going through their mind if they're, oh, I was supposed to have 8 people and now I'm looking at 6 and I don't know where the other 2 are. What options do they have at that point?
Yeah, that's a really critical moment in manufacturing again, in particular, is like, that 30 minutes before shift start, or even, up to an hour after shift start, where you're trying to kind of allocate resources or flex your staffing a little bit to make sure that you're set up to deliver. Uh, there can be quite a bit of thrash in that leading up to and first kind of part of the production line getting up and running. And yeah, I mean, if you're not fully staffed, you've got a couple of options. One, you could look at pulling resources from other parts of the facility, the factory, the warehouse. So kind of bringing folks from other places to meet the needs. The other thing you could do is you could call somebody in who's not scheduled to work that day. That's costly in a couple of different ways. And then the other option, like I mentioned before, is you just kind of run it as it is, and then you're asking more of the folks that are there. Either be more efficient or stay later to get the job done.
So that thrash that you mentioned, you don't know that it's upon you until it's actually upon you. What are you hearing from the folks that you work with that are TeamSense customers? What do they do ahead of time to try and protect themselves
Mm,
from those moments? And maybe we're getting into like, what's the bottom line impact of this
yeah.
no call, no show challenge?
Yeah, for sure. So there, I've had several conversations with ops leaders, plant managers that are trying to be kind of preemptive or get ahead of the no call, no shows that inevitably happen. I think the most common one that I see, Justin, is overstaffing. So
Mm.
no call, no shows, they happen. The extent to which they happen, the days on which they happen, those are a bit more unpredictable. But no call, no shows will happen. They will continue to happen. So I see a lot of ops leaders overstaff by, 2, 3, sometimes even 5 employees, depending on the size of the operation, uh, as a safety net. So I anticipate that there will be some no call, no shows. I know that I'm not going to take the productivity or the throughput hit, so I'm going to plan to overstaff to fill those holes or fill those voids, and those folks can kind of just flex throughout the facility to meet the needs, unexpected needs of staffing gaps. What's challenging though about that is, like I said, the no call no shows will happen, but the when and to the extent that which they happen is unpredictable. So there's the scenario where you're overstaffed and you don't need it, and then what, right? Like you can only sweep the floor for so long, or kind of go and meet other fill other roles if there's not like a production need or a packing, picking, shipping need to be met. And so yeah, that can be pretty demotivating as an employee too. Like you're the backfill and then you've got nothing to do. Now you got to go home early. Uh,
So it's really about getting it every day, trying to get it just right.
just
Sometimes
right.
under and over, and you have in some instances minutes to make sure that you get it just right, because you don't know about a no call no show until it's right there and there's an empty seat, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And you said minutes. That's no joke. Some of the factories, that I've worked in, that we support, and leaders for the factories that we talk to, uh, minutes downtime is measured in minutes.
Mm.
Tens of thousands of dollars per minute sometimes, depending on the customer. So yeah, minutes for sure are critical.
So granted, it's a big problem. It sounds like something that employees, HR teams, I'm sure, are concerned about it. Certainly supervisors and managers. What's caught if such a big problem, how come it hasn't been fixed before? What are some of the root causes of no call,
Yeah,
no show?
yeah. There's a few. I think the most obvious one that I see is just confusion. So so sometimes, it's not the intent of the employee to no call, no show. They just don't know who to call. Maybe there's not a defined process, or it's not standardized, or maybe their managers on vacation, and so and the process is just call, my boss directly. And so sometimes it's just confusion on who to communicate to. That's one. Another is sometimes there's kind of an internal drop in communication. So maybe an employee calls the hotline, leaves a message, and that just doesn't get cascaded out to the factory floor. And so supervisor thinks it's no call, no show, but somewhere on some voicemail somewhere is, the information being communicated by the employee. So confusion, lack of communication. I think the one that I hear most often is more around like employee preference and people preference in general. So, I mean, I don't know that I've ever heard of like a call off being at some shining moment. It usually is connected to something that's pretty challenging. I don't feel good. My kid is sick, not feeling well, or they got hurt. I'm taking care of an elderly parent unexpectedly. Like call offs tend to be around somewhat challenging moment. I just got a flat tire and I'm super stressed out. People don't want to then pick up the phone and talk to a person, or
Put on their smiley face and try and communicate with them.
exactly. Exactly. So I think there's just like often quite a bit of friction around uh, this often pretty challenging on a personal level moment, and so people just choose not to. People don't want to talk on the phone in general. Definitely not when they're going through something that's difficult.
And so it sounds like in that situation, most of these employees understand that there are ramifications for no call, no show. What's the trade-off? Talk me through.
Uh,
My young child's sick and crying, and I'm looking at some ramifications. There are ramifications for no call, no show, right? What's that trade-off like?
mm, yeah,
What
probably.
or let me I'm not doing a good job asking the question. Uh, what's at stake for me if I no call, no show? What am I looking at the next day?
Yeah, I mean, so there's some variation there, but what I see most often is like some progressive discipline type of structure around a no call no show. So there's occurrence policies, there's points policies, there's some variation there, but typically what it leads to is uh, a conversation with your boss, some sort of tally on your employee attendance point scale. So you're going to kind of pay for it in some way. So the trade-off is, do I do this uncomfortable thing, or can I stomach the points? Maybe I have enough points in my points balance, like it's not actually going to impact me, or I'm okay with this conversation when I get back in a different time with my manager around my attendance. But in the moment, the trade-off is, communicate or take the hit, take the on the progressive discipline scale.
And that's very interesting. We've talked about the measurable impact of no call, no show over time, overstaffing, things like that. But I think what you're getting at is there's probably a hidden cost here for putting employees in that uncomfortable moment uh,
Mm.
over time. What are you hearing about uh, what the impacts of that uncomfortable moment are? So let's take it up to the hundreds of employees level over many
Yeah.
months. What is that causing for leaders at some of the sites you're working with?
The I mean, I think the biggest impact from a leadership perspective is kind of getting back to that overall operational efficiency piece, right? Like no call no shows have a significant impact for the individual and for the business. And so, the conversations that I'm kind of hearing and a part of is like, how do we make this easy for employees to communicate, so we don't have to try to scramble on the back end to figure it out. And there's differences. Some companies are more excuse my like phraseology here, like more carrot, some are more stick. I see and am a part of some conversations with leaders at these large companies that are trying to find that balance, right? Do we just punish the no call no show harder, or do we incentivize employees not to? But we can't do nothing. It's too impactful.
Mm.
And so I think the impact is really just kind of like these strategic conversations around how do you approach being more proactive around no call no shows. And there's so many different things to balance. There's so many different things to balance. Impact, employee experience, all of those things. They're tough questions.
Proactive. So let's put a pin in that. I want to come back to it because I think we've been talking, some of the examples you've been giving are reactive. What do I do when I find this thing out? But probably things I think you're saying that people could do in advance to minimize the pressure that employees feel in that moment, that managers feel in that moment, that HR spends a lot of time in many of the sites we work with scrambling around in the morning
Yeah.
too to find out who's there, who isn't, etc. So I want to tell the stories, but let me pause for a second. We will have time for Q&A for our attendees, so please send those questions in to the Q&A, not the chat in your meeting, and we'll get to those. Definitely want to open up some time for some back and forth there. So Adam, you and I have spent lots of time on the road visiting with customers, and the stories are for me, one of the best parts of doing this job and hearing
Sure.
what kind of impact this is. So let's talk about the speed of call because that was something you mentioned. If you're in time pressure in the morning, your kid's sick, you've got on the employee side, you've got minutes too to make a decision and figure out
Mm.
call no show. What what are some of the talk to me about some of the existing options for call off and how they are too slow and what that means for employees when they go to try and communicate with their employer.
Yeah, that that's a big part of it. I've heard some. I think the most recent example that I heard, Justin, is a gal who works at a automotive supplier out in South Carolina, and she was telling me about well, you said like what's the modes of call off. So their existing process was to have like a third party or an outsourced hotline, and so employee would call. This company would have an operator pick up the phone and field the call off. But what was unique about this situation was it was a Spanish speaking employee, and so the process for this Spanish speaker was to get transferred into kind of an interpreter or somebody that could get all of the information in the language that the employee spoke. And three times in a row, when this transfer was attempted, it dropped. The call dropped, and so this employee, again, probably not having their best day, has tried now three times to call off. He's 15 minutes in to trying to call off, and he just abandons it. He's like, forget about it. I'm not going to do it. But no call, no show has a penalty or has a cost, right? We talked about that earlier. So this employee actually calls the phone carrier. Maybe he got online and saw the history. I don't know, but took the time to go in and get the phone records so he could go back to the HR leader at this site and say, don't give me the points, don't give me the penalty. I promised I made an honest effort here to call off. And so I think that's the time, the speed, right? Like if it's unpredictable and it could take up to 15 minutes, I've heard stories up to 45 minutes
Mm.
of waiting on hold or waiting to try and get into the right inbox. It's just not going to do it. Like the convenience of time or just being present amidst this difficult situation is just greater than the point or two or thing that you have to clean up on the back end. But what a challenging experience that is.
Well, and I can only that 3 calls plus did this person print out the forms or I mean that
Yeah, literally physical. Here's
so
the
that's at
yeah.
least 30 minutes if we're generous. It's probably an
Yeah.
hour taken out of that person's time to do the right thing.
I think that's the point too, is or one of them anyways, is like a no call no show isn't always just kind of a bad apple or bad actor. There's plenty that are really well intentioned employees trying to do the right thing that for whatever reason don't know what to do or can't do it the way that's expected of them, or it's taking too long and too inconvenient or unsuccessful, and that sucks. Like I know as an employee, it's important for me to demonstrate that I care, to show up and do a good job. People take pride in the work that they do and the character that they have. And something like a no call, no show uh, can actually it would be difficult for somebody to accept. Like they don't want that to be somebody's impression of them as a person, and proven no better than somebody taking the time to print out their phone records, right? Like willing to take that time because I want you to know as my employer that I care.
Yeah, and that gets back to the idea too of that interpersonal. So in that case, the person was talking to an operator or an attendant at a call center solution.
Yeah.
But I imagine that in certain situations when they have to call their manager directly, that is also an uncomfortable situation. Do you have any stories about that or people that have tried to avoid that because like you said, you're not your best. Maybe you're vomiting. I don't know. But then you have to
Yeah.
get on the phone and I have to find out if Adam's gonna pick up so I can tell Adam that I'm not coming in. What have you heard about what kind of situations that causes?
Yeah, I mean, I hear that as well. And I think I mentioned it earlier. There's just kind of a more macro transition in people preference to not talk on the phone. Like, text is so much more preferred in your personal life. Like, how many more text messages do I send in a day than phone calls that I have? And I can say that about just about anybody I interact with. That's making its way though into the professional world. Like, that doesn't just stop now because I'm working, versus having a conversation or wanting to engage with my friends. And so I definitely hear a reluctance from employees to pick up the phone and make a phone call. But there's some other challenges that I hear too around, that process of no call, no show, in connection with like when the expectation is that you call your manager. So I don't want to do it. I don't want to pick up the phone and have that uncomfortable conversation. So I just don't. That's the no call, no show. But um, I also hear like when process is contact manager directly, that there tends to be like some partiality or some lack of consistency around how it's enforced. So, now this isn't true in all cases, but I know a lot of the time on the factory floor, like the supervisor, the frontline supervisor often used to be an individual contributor for the team that they're managing.
Mhm.
And, so there'll be times where, if the process is call your manager or don't call your manager, they're the one that holds the key to the time card. And so there'll be no call, no shows that don't get put onto time cards because it's a friend of the supervisor. Um, or vice versa, like, it'll be communicated, but then there's a little bit of, I've heard this story, Justin, I'm not kidding you. Like, there'll be, because they hold the key and the process is through them, there's like, I've heard of horror stories of like punishing people, like, not because it's not like this standardized process that's got checks and balances, where somebody did call and like, oh, I lost that message, no call, no show.
A- And and so there it's probably inevitable when there's people involved, there's going to be, and at some time there's some bias involved. But the thing that I think you're pointing out is if I'm an employee, I never know whether my call off is treated the same as somebody else's. My supervisor might be salt of the earth, doing the right thing and following, being completely objective, but I'm never gonna know that, and it's really easy, I think, for people to assume the worst under that situation. So
Sure.
that lack of transparency, I'm sure has some other downstream impacts on morale, on team cohesion, on employee engagement.
Yeah. And I don't know that you're never going to know it. You might just like not know it until it's too late.
Yeah.
So often these progressive discipline policies have, a set of conversations that ultimately lead to termination. So you may think that something got coded correctly or got communicated appropriately and is impacting you in one way, when the reality is like the source of truth has some different information. And I hear more often than not, there's this huge kind of gap between, what the employee believes is true about where they're at with attendance points or occurrences, or what their standing is from an attendance perspective, and what the employer and the employee believe. So there's this gap. And I've heard plenty of scenarios where, the employee didn't see it coming.
Mm.
Like, I didn't know that I had no call, no show that many times, and now I'm having this conversation about exiting the organization. And it didn't feel like I knew that as the employee. I didn't know that was coming.
Almost a surprise because
Yeah,
most employees don't keep a tally of their points on the bedside table. They're not necessarily aware of how close they are to that situation. Well, this is a TeamSense webinar, so let's just talk about TeamSense. And you've mentioned some challenges with other solutions in terms of no call, no shows. So compare, we've already done it a little bit implicitly, but compare the speed to call off. And that is one of the root causes of no call, no shows, or it affects no call, no shows. talk to me about the speed of other solutions versus the speed of TeamSense.
Yeah, I think speed and simplicity. But I, we did the math recently. Um, the average time to report an absence through TeamSense is, I think, is between 40 and 45 seconds. So under a minute, and consistent, because it's the same every time. It's not people driven. It's
Mm,
automation driven.
yeah.
So 45 seconds or less. And then there's just a ton of variability depending on the other process. So if it's call your manager directly, that could be relatively quick. uh, if they pick up, if it goes to voicemail, if they're working, like it could be different if they are not on that day. You may have to take some subsequent step. I told you about kind of the outsourced hotline path, and that can be about 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, if all goes well. If there isn't an extended hold time because of capacity constraints, or because of a transfer for language, or if the call isn't dropped. So that can be 2.5 minutes, but it could also be up to 45 minutes. I've heard plenty of times.
Okay, so that's it takes too long to call up with other solutions. And then how about that? I don't want to talk to anybody situation. I mean, that's on the face pretty obvious with
Yeah.
TeamSense. You're interacting with your mobile device. What do employees and managers tell you about the benefit of not having to interact with folks when you're at your worst in some cases?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, we see this consistently. A reduction in no call, no shows consistently across our customer base. And the employees, or the companies, attribute it to the employees being willing to communicate through a channel that's preferred and more comfortable. And so I often hear Justin, like, oh, we're making it with like new TeamSense customers or prospective TeamSense customers. Oh, we're going to make it too easy to call off. Aren't we going to see absenteeism go up? Actually, no. Like you because you're making it easier, what you're actually going to reduce is the no call, no shows, and you're
Mm.
going to get more visibility more often to the thing that causes a ton of thrash within the organization. I remember a call, a conversation from, gosh, it's probably 4 or 5 months ago now. It was interesting because it was like HR and ops on the same call. We're going through kind of like what's life going to be like with TeamSense. And I remember the HR person and I had that point of view of like, oh, aren't we making it too easy? And the ops leader like just stepped in and said, I don't care if absenteeism goes up if no call, no shows go down.
Hmm.
And I was like, oh, interesting. Like, tell me more. And he said that there's so much thrash when I don't have foresight. I would rather have more people not show up and communicate that than have no call, no shows, even at a smaller scale, because of how impactful that is to getting the line up and running, getting your staffing right, getting your lines level set, and delivering on productivity, on time delivery, quality goals. Got to have that.
And so really it was bringing into the light something that was happening anyway. The amount of absenteeism on a given day might be the same, but without an effective call off solution, a larger share of that was no call, no shows, even
That's
if
right.
people were showing up. That's very interesting. Well, I'm looking at time, Adam, and we have some great questions, so we'll pivot over to that. You already got one of them. There was a question that came in exactly about that, about aren't we going to make it easier for people to call off, want that? So we got that one taken care of.
Yeah.
What are this question is, what are other companies doing to manage no call, no shows with TeamSense? And I don't know what this alludes to, but it reminds me
Hmm.
of something you just said, being proactive. So I'm going
Yeah.
to put words in this person's mouth, maybe. Forgive me if you sent this question in. How are people using uh, TeamSense to get ahead of no call, no shows and to do new things?
Yeah. There's a couple things come to mind. So one, And I know we talked about it a little bit earlier, but there's often kind of that gap between what the employer knows around an employee's history and their standing within the progressive policy and what the employee believes. So the first thing that TeamSense is doing is bridging that communication gap. So making it easy for employees when they call in or on demand to see their attendance history, to understand the policy or understand the implications of uh, uh, what happens if they get another point or two or four. So that's the first thing, is making it easy for employees to understand where they stand.
And
Then they can
they can see their points up to the
sure
minute in TeamSense, so they can just, if they go to call off, they'll be looking at what they get that information before they make that decision, right?
before they make the decision, and then you can also just go get it on demand. So just making it easy for employees to know where they stand, making the best decision with all real-time information. That's one. The other thing is, we have a handful of companies that are also, once a no call no show happens, they are doing outreach after the fact to understand what's happening. Is there so I'll make it really practical. So you can send a set of questions out via text through TeamSense. So say these 5 employees no call no showed today. um, you can send them a form requesting information. The first one is typically like, "Hey, we see you no called no showed today. Are you okay?" Like, leading with some empathy. Again, often it's a well-intentioned employee that's just having a bad day. Maybe it's just like a friendly nudge to reinforce policy and say, "Hey, are you okay?" Reminder: the expectation is that you do this. But the other thing that we've seen a ton of is employees just say, "Yeah, I quit." And that sucks. Don't get me wrong. But what sucks more than that is expecting that employee to show up the next day or two and not having any visibility at all.
Mm.
Right. And so some of the effort around understanding the drivers behind that particular no call, no show, somebody having a hard day and just needed to be reminded of policy, or are you getting ahead of quiet quitting? So ops
Mm.
can have a different day today or a different day tomorrow than they did today, right? And remove that thrash.
And it comes back to that transparency, visibility, knowing what's going on. That's very interesting. Okay, I have
Yeah,
another
absolutely.
here that came in. And this is good. We've got a little bit of skepticism here, so I'll read the question. I
Nice.
assume that the story you shared, or the stories you shared, are best case scenarios. For your customers who haven't been as successful reducing no call no shows, what could they have done better, or what mistakes did they make? This might actually, who knows? Maybe this is from an existing customer who's trying
Could
to
be.
how to do this. So it's not just you bring TeamSense and it solves everything. Tell us about the process and how the team has to support
Yeah.
technology.
No, it's good. And like invite, if this is a existing customer, invite a phone call after, if I don't get to the heart of the question or you want to go deeper here. So again, tough without knowing the entire context. So I'll make some assumptions here, and I hope that this doesn't get received wrong. Um, but it could be, I've seen just kind of a lack of policy enforcement around it sometimes. So if there are if there's a bit of rigidity around the policy and the procedure, I've seen that be effective in, like, we treat no call no shows very seriously, when exceptions are made, that can kind of dilute the impact and start to kind of affect the occurrences or the frequency of no call no shows. So if you're providing alternative paths, if you're making exceptions to the process that you've standardized, I've seen folks kind of take advantage a bit of the system when they get exceptions made for them personally, or people talk. If exceptions are made for their peers, uh, you can start to kind of uh, put some poison in the bucket there. Another thing, if you want to kind of go more on the positive spin, I've seen several customers You were there, Justin, in Georgia a couple months back. There was a wheel that employees got to spin if they had perfect attendance for a month, or maybe it was a quarter, 3 months, or something like that. And so I've seen some really cool things done around just positive reinforcement for the right behavior around attendance, or just around no call, no shows in particular. So you can kind of attack it from both sides. Be standardized, make no exceptions, and kind of force the behavior change. Uh, and then the other piece would be, you could do some things for fun, gamification, to kind of bring a positive light to driving the right behavior.
You mentioned earlier carrots and sticks. There's more
Yeah.
options there with TeamSense. There's some carrots that maybe people didn't have access to before.
Yeah, and not to be too long-winded here, but the other thing potentially that you could do, if this isn't your experience, is go dig into a handful of no call, no shows. Like, who they are. Maybe it's not a form in TeamSense, that's okay. But go talk to them, understand what the driver was for them. Were they confused? On what to do? Did they just not want to do it? What are the drivers for the no call, no shows? I bet you could get a good feel for some of the company specific needs by a handful of conversations.
That's great advice. Carolyn, I have one more question that's come in. If no others have come in, should we talk about what's happening next week? And then I can ask the last question and we wrap?
Let's do it. That sounds great. Okay. We have a really exciting webinar next week again with Justin. We'll be joined by our founder and CEO, Sheila. We're going to be talking a lot around employee engagement, and especially tackling those big rocks and really encouraging HR managers to take their data and really make it an actionable thing for their organization. So we'll be talking through, why is it so important now more than ever for more employee engagement, and why you should really be focusing in on it. And then really just tackling, how do you actually get results from employee surveys and really do something about it. So I'm super excited for that. I know, Justin, that will be a lot of fun for you and Sheila. So yeah, that's kind of my main thing. And then before we jump to the last question, I just wanted to share a little bit more about how to get in touch with us. So we obviously appreciate you joining us every Tuesday here. You can take a look at our website. There's ways that you can talk to an expert, get a demo. We also have plenty of great case studies if you want to take a look at how other customers of ours have been utilizing TeamSense in their organization. And again, if you've registered for these webinars, you'll get an invite every week. So that's a great way to join us. But I'll pass it back to you, Justin, to kind of finish off the questioning.
All right. I think this one might be pretty direct and straightforward, Adam. The question is, take us out with this one. We keep track of attendance points in a spreadsheet. How would we connect that to TeamSense?
Yeah, I hear that often. So if that's you, that's pretty commonplace. So really simple. You can just drag and drop that spreadsheet into a secure file location. So we set up kind of a light integration, so to speak, and TeamSense can just ingest those points values into our framework. And so when an employee then uses TeamSense to call off, it'll display those values. So we don't attempt to be the points logic. We just ingest the values and are kind of the user interface or the communication mechanism back to employees.
And I'll just add on that that's the kind of the light point integration, but we've spoken about this on past webinars with Josh Moon and others, that there's full on HRIS integrations that we can offer also. So depending on where you are in that spectrum, the most important thing is, as we've talked about here, is to get that visibility out to the employees so they know when they're making a decision about not coming in or whether to call off or no call, no show, they have information that they can use to make that. But lots of different levels of integration that we can offer for sure. Yeah. Well, Adam, it's always a pleasure. Great talking with you. Thanks for sharing your insights and some of those customer stories. And thank all of you for joining us. Carolyn, if there's nothing else, I think we can wrap.
That's right. We appreciate everybody joining us. And again, we'll see you next week on Tuesday for our TeamSense Tuesday webinars. Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Justin.
Cool. See ya.
Thank you.
Good one. Bye.